Welcome to the Wealth Standing Podcast. This is episode 480. Today is July 16th, 2025. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. Well, today I just wanted to get in a quick episode, and I wanted to do that to address a lot of the real confusion in the news and in the media about inflation. It's about what I think is a big lie that you're being told about inflation, and you can see this in their data and in their reporting. One day, you'll be told that the CPI index is indicating inflation is, and then I'm doing air quotes here, but it's higher than expected. And literally, within 24 hours, the next day, you'll wake up and they'll tell you that the PCI, again, air quotes here, unexpectedly lower than forecasted. Here's the bottom line. And I want you to think of this in terms of the media narrative, which is really where the big lie is, okay? On the one hand, the media is telling you, in the current environment we're in right now, that we're going to be seeing higher than normal inflation, that it's going to cause the Federal Reserve to pause or maybe even to raise interest rates, and that the reason is that we're going to see price inflation due to tariffs. Now, here's the point here, and it's very subtle, and again, it's like much of the media narrative where they create an illusion like a magician does, where they distract your attention in a different direction so they can perform a trick. You see, because the trick they're playing here is that on the one hand, they're telling you we're going to see inflation because of tariffs. But what are tariffs? Well, the media's done a good job of telling you what tariffs are. A tariff is a tax. Oh, by the way, the media didn't make a big deal about that over the previous 4 years, but all of a sudden they've come to the conclusion that a tariff is not industrial policy, it's not being done for national security reasons, it's suddenly a tax, which it is. I agree that it's a tax, don't get me wrong here. As a side note though, a tariff is a specific type of tax, it's a consumption tax, and I personally, as a fat cat rich guy, I would much rather pay a consumption tax than an income tax. But I digress. In any case, a tariff is a tax, okay? And the media, again, going out of their way to tell you that it's a tax. And by the way, unlike other taxes that they seem to love, they want you to know that this tax is going to be paid by you, right? Normally, it's a tax to soak the rich, or it's a tax to help the children, or it's a tax to protect the environment, or to fund the Social Security trust system, right? Some other nonsense. But in this case, it's specifically a tax that you are going to pay. Now, again, I don't necessarily dispute that. But here's the deal. In your lifetime, or go back in history, can you remember or can you find a time when the narrative of the mainstream media was that a tax was inflationary? Right? Because that's what they're telling you. They're telling you that we have all this future inflation coming, and it's all because of tariffs. But what are tariffs? Tariffs are a tax. And again, when the media is all happy about you paying more in payroll taxes, or more in property taxes, or more in income taxes, do they ever tell you that that's going to cause inflation? I can't think of an example of when they've done that. Okay, no. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that tariffs aren't going to raise prices. But I'm telling you that if a tariff is a tax, which it is, then how can it also be inflationary? And if it is inflationary, why aren't all the other taxes that the media seems to be so in favor of, why aren't they also inflationary? Okay, and let's talk about that inflationary part, because this, again, is the big lie. And in the media dialectic, what do? They go back 100 years ago and they tell you, look at the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. Look what it did. It not only caused a depression in the United States, but it crashed the entire global economy. Okay, again, now I'm not going to dispute that, although I don't agree with that specific narrative. I think the depression and the crash of the global economy had a lot more to do with the Federal Reserve, specifically in the U.S., and general tax policy all around the world. And again, tax policy, not only tariffs, but tax policy. Because really, if you look at U.S. tariffs, yes, they were raised during Smoot-Hawley, But that's only because tariffs had come down so much following World War I. In any case, let's not dispute that part of it, but let's focus on Smoot-Hawley. Okay, again, the media, they want to convince you that Smoot-Hawley tariffs caused the Depression, right? And then in the same breath, they're telling you that tariffs are inflationary. But what's the definition of a depression? A depression is in and of itself deflation. It's deflationary. That's why the economy goes through a depression, like a hole in the economy. It's because prices don't go up, they go down. And that's exactly what happened during the Depression. Again, how much you lay on that on Smoot-Hawley's fault is debatable. But on the one hand, they can't tell you that tariffs are a tax and they're inflationary, but then tell you tariffs are going to crush the global and the U.S. economy because they're deflationary. And you might try and argue the finer point that tariffs are going to raise prices, which are going to crash the economy, which are going to then lower prices, but that's minutia, right? If that is the outcome, then indeed they are not inflationary, they are deflationary. Bottom line is, the media creates a narrative, and they distort and cherry pick the facts to support that narrative, whether it's true or not. Now, I'm not disputing that taxes are going to raise prices, but higher prices in and of themselves are not inflationary. Again, textbook definition of inflation isn't about higher prices. It's about the loss of a currency's purchasing power. If you choose to buy a product or a service and pay a higher price for it than you did in the past or than you do with comparable products, it's not because that the prices have been inflated. It's because you perceive a higher value and you're willing to pay more for a higher quality product or service. That's different than inflation, which is caused by monetary policy, which makes you pay more for a product or service, not because it's better, not because you perceive more value, but because your currency, in this case the US dollar, has been devalued and therefore purchases less products and services than it used to. There's a big difference between monetary-induced inflation and simply higher prices. Higher prices can also come about as a result of simply increased demand, right? Not necessarily that your purchasing power has declined, but simply because there's scarcity, which, right, is the whole basis of the economic system. The reason we have price discovery is so that scarce resources get allocated to the most efficient areas, and the way we do that is through, what Adam Smith called the hidden hand of the economy, where the allocation is not determined by a bureaucracy or a government or a group of people agreeing on things, but it's through a decentralized approach where each individual chooses how much they're willing to spend on that product or service. So it's called price discovery. The scarcer the resource, the higher the price. That's not inflation. That has nothing to do with monetary policy. That's simply the laws of economics being governed by scarcity. Here's the bottom line. You're being fed a bunch of mumbo-jumbo on inflation, right? And particularly about the media digging up the old term of stagflation. In fact, if you're interested, now I know at this point the people with ADHD have all gone. They're not listening at this point, and we really don't care about the other people. But if you're really interested and you want to know more about stagflation, let me know, and if there's enough interest, I'll do another podcast episode. I've talked about it in the past. There's more that we can clarify with it in today's environment, but I don't even want to waste my time talking about it if no one wants to hear about it. But here's the bottom line. Prices are going up. It's not going to be, in my opinion, a stagflationary environment. It's going to be a growthflation environment. There's a big difference there. And the reason I believe it's going to be growthflation as opposed to stagflation or as opposed to a depression is because prices are going to continue to rise. Okay, I'm not saying that prices aren't going up, but they're going to do so for two very distinct reasons. One will be, yes, the continued monetary policy, which devalues the U.S. currency, which is the overall plan of the government. right? That's how they effectively monetize the debt. That's going to continue. It's just the way the system works, and it's going to continue. So we will continue to have monetary devaluation of the dollar, which will create inflation. But on the other hand, we're also going to see a great deal of higher prices, not caused by monetary devaluation, but caused because of scarcity. And scarcity is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's an economic principle. We're talking scarcity in terms of labor. Over the next decade, we've got something, I don't have the statistic right in front of me, but something like 18 million baby boomers, the last of them, are finally going to leave the workforce. And there aren't enough younger workers to make up that gap. Now, the good news, if you're living in the United States, is that the U.S. is going to be in a much better position than other countries are. This is a global phenomenon. But we are going to see wage increases due to qualified worker scarcity. We're also going to see higher prices due to tariffs because it does cost more to produce domestically in the United States. Yeah, that will result in higher prices, but remember, I'm talking growthflation, not stagflation. As the prices go up, so will domestic production, and that's how I see growthflation playing out as opposed to the 1970s style stagflation. And once again, the United States is going to be in a far better position to deal with this, not only to deal with it, but to benefit from it as compared to places like Europe. And also, and then again, this gets back to why things are different now than they were during the stagnationary 1970s. But the reason I see it as growthflation is because to counteract those higher costs of labor and higher costs of domestic production, we're also going to continue to see the productivity improvements in digitization, which is robots and automation and artificial intelligence and all the other benefits that we've seen from computers and the internet and all these things over the last 40, 50 years. We're going to see that continue to expand. And that application of technology is deflationary. And it's going to counter a lot of these impacts where we are seeing the higher prices. And in addition to that, we also are going to get the impact of deflation as a result of declining birth rates. And that's not just in the U.S., it's actually a global problem. For many years, everybody was worried about overpopulation. The truth of the matter is, it's depopulation that is going to uproot the fundamentals of what has grown the economy in the last 80 years. Because in many aspects, and frankly in most countries, the only real growth they've had has come about because of population growth. And we're getting to a point where that growth is slowing down. And that's bad news for the overall economic system, but at the same time, it's also a counterweight to inflation because depopulation is deflationary. In any case, just my thoughts. Come on back for future episodes. I've got plenty more to share with you. Until then, as always, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.